In this video, I'm going to show you what I do for DPS in Necromancy. Now, I am not exactly the best in the world at DPS in Necromancy, but I'm doing okay, and I'm getting some pretty decent kill times at some of the bosses. At the moment, I am 43 kills into Raziel, and I have a 1 minute 48 kill, and at Hermod, I have a 15.6 second kill. So while I won't be going through full ability rotations in this video, I'm going to show you my initial start to the fight of a rotation, and then I'm also going to show you some tips and some things you can do to increase your DPS and things you can do in combat that's pretty useful anyway. If that seems useful to you, then stick around and let's go. So the very first thing I'm going to talk about is the initial rotation that I will use in every single boss encounter pretty much that I do. This revolves around the Living Death ability, which you get at level 76, and it's your ultimate ability. It has a 100% adrenaline cost, and it's kind of like your Sunshine rotation, your Death Swiftness rotation, but it's Necromancy. Important information to know is that when you use the Living Death ability, it resets the cooldown of Death Skulls and of Touch of Death. So I always make sure to start the fight out with the Death Skulls, Touch of Death, and then I will build my way up to using the Living Death ability at 100% adrenaline. So the rotation looks a little bit like this. You will start a fight out and you will apply your Smoke Cloud and your Vulnerability Bomb, and then immediately you will use your Death Skulls ability, followed by Touch of Death. From here on out, it is just using any sort of filler ability such as Soul Sap or your basic ability, but don't touch Finger of Death until you reach 100% adrenaline and you've activated Living Death. So once you've reached 100% adrenaline, you will drop off your Living Death ability, and then it will reset your Death Skulls and your Touch of Death. Immediately use an Adrenaline renewal and then build your way back up to Death Skulls. Throw out Death Skulls straight away, and then as soon as that is done, you want to start firing off Touch of Death followed by Finger of Death, and then if you have Necrosis stacks, which you definitely will have at this point, you will use Finger of Death again until you no longer have any Necrosis stacks or Adrenaline. Then I will use the Death Grasp ability, which is your weapon special attack, as this hits really hard as well. From here on out, your main focus is pretty much going to be using Touch of Death and using Finger of Death whenever you can. While you have Living Death up, your Finger of Death is going to deal 1.5 times damage. Your Death Skulls is reduced to 12-second cooldown, so you want to use that every chance you can as well. And basic abilities are going to generate more Necrosis stacks, meaning more Finger of Death abilities to use as well. So you want to be firing those off as much as you can, as 1.5 times damage is a hell of a lot. This is pretty much the rotation until your Living Death cooldown is gone. Still use things like your Volley of Souls in between if your other stuff's on cooldown, of course, but your main focus is absolutely using Touch of Death and then Finger of Death whenever you can. And this is the initial rotation that I'll use at every single boss fight. The same at Raziel. This rotation itself gets a kill at Hermod in 16 seconds once you pair it with the Undead Sigil and things like that and the Undead perk. So this is what works for me. While there may be other ways to do it, this is what I'm doing. From here on out, I'm pretty much just going to be giving you some general tips that I've seen that helps increase DPS along the way that you can put into practice when you're doing combat so that you can also take advantage of these things. First of all is your conjures can all be summoned before you go into the battle. What I tend to do is enter the instance and then immediately summon all 3 conjures because they cost 0 adrenaline if you have no target. It is also worth mentioning that you can pre-cast abilities, the command abilities on these as well, specifically the Vengeful Ghost command ability because it actually costs 70% adrenaline. You want to cast this before you have a target because then it's free and it will increase the amount of damage you can deal, but also the healing you get as well. Something I started doing like very early on when I started Necromancy was added 2 revolution spaces to the beginning of my action bar, and I put in there Touch of Death and the Soul Sap ability. This is because these are the basic abilities. They're fairly short cooldown on the Soul Sap with 5.4 seconds, and you want to be using them pretty much every chance you have. So I leave these on revolution. That way I can't forget about using them and the stacks are constantly being, stacked up, but also it gives me more time to think about what I'm doing with other abilities as well. This has been an absolute game changer for me, and I know quite a lot of other people have done the same thing too. So if you haven't done this, it may be something to consider, especially if you are playing pretty much full manual. I can't stress enough how important it is that you use the Command Skeleton Warrior ability pretty much every time it is off cooldown. It costs 0 adrenaline to use this, just the global cooldown, and it is incredibly strong. You could maybe even consider putting a 3rd Revo slot and putting the actual skeleton in there, and that way I'll use the command option off of cooldown for you every single time, or just keep on top of it. Make sure you're using it every single time that it's available because holy crap, this thing is really good and costs you no adrenaline. This next tip is for Threads of Fate. This is an insanely good ability for using in AoE. Threads of Fate is like Greater Chain. It will link up to 4 additional enemies, so 5 in total, and it is going to allow you to cast 2 abilities onto all of those targets at the same time. But because you can use 2 abilities, there's a few tricks you can do. For example, if you have a full stack of souls and then you use Threads of Fate, you can throw your volley of souls and deal a ton of damage to the enemies that are linked, but also if you use soul sap straight afterwards, any target that is still linked will give you an additional soul as well, meaning if you have 3 targets, you will immediately get 3 souls again and can then fire out those souls in a volley of souls again. So you've just done volley of souls, soul sap, volley of souls, and if this is on a boss target that has summons, for example, it's a ton of damage. The same thing goes if you want to use volley of souls on the actual Threads of Fate and you don't have any souls, you can use Threads of Fate, then use soul sap to get all 3 souls and then throw a volley of souls straight away. So you can kind of mix this one up. It's really freaking good. I will mention, however, that if you use the Threads of Fate and then use Touch of Death, you will still only get 4 Necrosis stacks. The next thing I wanted to mention is about the Death Skulls ability, which is one of the best abilities that you have. It bounces between you and the enemies within 5 tiles up to 6 times. It does a ton of damage basically, and you want to keep this bouncing. However, it does bounce to you, so you have to be in range for it to bounce along the way. There's plenty of times that I've used this. It's the first Necromancer fight and I've gone too far away after casting it and then it immediately gets wasted. So keep in mind that if you're going to cast the Death Skulls ability, that you want to stay within the distance, the 5 tiles, to make sure this ability doesn't just cancel out, because it costs you 6% adrenaline if you have the Kiln Cape, and this is kind of like really important to not waste. The final tip that I have for this video really is going to be taking advantage of the Invoke Death incantation. The Invoke Death incantation pretty much allows you to execute any target that's below 30,000 health, assuming that is also below 20% of its current health as well. The way this works is it applies the death mark debuff to the target that you use it on, and as long as in the next 6 seconds it meets the requirements of either less than 30,000 health and also less than 20% of its max health, it will instantly die the next necromancy ability that you use on this target. This can be really useful for Raziel, and I'm sure it'll be useful for a lot of other things as well. So keep this one up your sleeve and cast it right towards the end when it hits the last like 40,000 health, and then as soon as it drops below that threshold, it's dead. You can get rid of it. Nice, easy insta kill, beautiful. So, as of so far, that's pretty much everything I've learned for DPS through Necromancy. So far, I've not looked at anybody else, like another content creator or anything like that, on what they're doing. I've taken tips and stuff from other players that have said, you should try doing this while I'm streaming and stuff. But otherwise, it's everything that I've kind of just learned on my own. So, of course, there's going to be different things that may work better. But seeing as I had a lot of requests for this, I figured I would get it done and send it out to you guys. That being said, there's going to be plenty of things to learn along the way, plenty of improvements to make, plenty of little like things to clean up and make better. So keep that in mind. This is a current guide, and I will make an upgraded version of this once there is more information that I know works a lot better. But for those of you that were completely lost before this video, hopefully this helps you understand it just a little bit better. Finally, as for these massive, like huge hits that you're seeing, 30k after 30k after 30k at Raziel and at this Hermod boss, these are pretty much from all of the Undead Slayer perks. So people are getting Undead Slayer perk on their gear, Undead Slayer ability. They're using the Salve Amulet E as well. These are all really important things for getting those massive big hits, because it increases your damage by a freaking ton. You won't be seeing these huge hits at other bosses as of right now, probably. You will see big hits still, but you're not going to be seeing it as consistent and as hard as Raziel and Hermod and anything that the Undead perk works on. For example, Taraket will probably be the exact same. So keep that in mind when you're seeing 30ks and then you're trying it on a different boss and not seeing 30ks. This is what it is. But anyway, hopefully this video was helpful. Again, I will upgrade this. I will update this as soon as I have like solid, like reliable information, and we'll go from there. But anyway, like I said, hope it was helpful. If it was, let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, leave them down below. If you have any better tips, any better advice, or any corrections, leave them in the comments below as well. I will very much appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.